Hello, Eloy. You are just the reflecting reflector. Check this out. I actually had to take some serious notes. But what I don't want to do is do the point by point, pick, clarify this, answer that. That's not where I'm at. I'm trying to group them a little bit and see if I can say something of interest for each group. So, get to look at me consult the notes during the interview in a non-Anchorman fashion. So, yes, first thing, perhaps a little thing, even though it may have felt like a big thing in your reflections about it, but for what it's worth, I thought the time pacing, the cutting, and so on was a great virtue. I found myself even thinking during the venture, geez, these guys ought to have time constraints more often, although, again, perhaps not quite as severe as this one. I agree about that. But the thing I wanted to tell you about a little bit, and think of this as just techniques talk. One of the considerations in hard cuts, particularly with time skips, is a bit of a double check to say, and any little thing you want to do, anything I'm missing about the way you're handling this, is my cut coming down too hard, is a possibility. Sometimes not doing that leads to happy accidents, as you pointed out. Others may tend to undercut a lot of things you may have had in mind. And which side of that line, treating this situation with the little girl and the fire and stuff like that a little differently, which side of the line that falls on is a really interesting case study for some person who's going to analyze these videos decades from now, assiduously, I'm sure. But we don't have to go there, just recognize that it's a really interesting techniques point, but that you can, in play, say, hold up there, Mr. Snippy, don't snip yet. Just a thought on that. Now, another thing that I could bring up more to Anthony than to you, but it was very relevant for your character, is that given that passage of time, the issue of the one die roll, except when mandated by certain things, like the mark, but the issue of the one die roll, because you're kind of out of your turf, once you've been living in a community for that long, at least speaking as, my way of GMing the game, pretty much the one die penalty roll is gone. Once the characters have really settled in, then they're just rolling with 2 dice all the time. There is the point of the dangerous terrain too. That's a bit of a rules mandate there, and whether you guys were in the technical dangerous terrain as defined by Anthony's prep, we'll have to find out from his own reflections, but I suspect you may have been, so I guess that would have applied after all in some cases. Still, pretty brutal. And I tend to be fairly generous with the, okay, now that you guys have lived there and we've had some time skips, you're pretty much 2 dice guys from now on. Well, only saying that because of how relevant it was to some of your situations. Let's take a look at some magic rules. All of these are actually explicit. One thing with respect I suggest is that you may be used to extrapolating a lot in dealing with rules because of their gaps in texts. And if I say so myself, Circle of Hands is pretty low on gaps due to the extensive playtesting it received. And so some of your questions are nicely accounted for. There's really no going back for anything for a Circle Knight in terms of, well, this is where he lands at the end of play, and of its venture, and what do I get when I pick him up, or someone picks them up for another venture, and the answer is they land in your lap pretty much the way they ended in the last person's lap. And so, no, there is no clearing of marks or whatever. Gifts aren't used up. That guy can turn into a silver dragon. That's what they can do. They have that gift. It's not going to go away. So the idea of, oh, okay, we're going to go back and kind of, bust him back to, his baseline or somehow clear a lot of the things that happened. No, just get what you got and move on. You are allowed to revise the spells that they have in mind if they aren't a wizard, mainly just reflecting that the character has thought about magic, in the interim, and that they're getting their spells in kind of a gifty way, sort of a lendy way from a wizard anyway. And you're right that the matrix clears when you fill it, but it clears when you fill it no matter what, in terms of when it's filled, has nothing to do with venture to venture. So all that is to say that this character will keep the gift of being a silver dragon and will keep the marks. Another thing about marks you may be interested in is that they do cancel. That if you had, for example, 2 black marks, 2 marks of Herbagia and 3 marks of Amborion, you effectively have 1 mark of Amborion. So something to keep in mind there. There are elements of how you want to handle that in terms of behavior in play that are very much up to you. The rules don't mandate what a character acts like because of their marks. Where you choose to extrapolate, this is where extrapolation is very much in your hands. What does that mean for what this character is like? It's not just in your hands, it's in the hands of whoever plays that character going forward, which I think is a neat feature. All right, I'm taking way too much time on this part. I believe I may have cleared what I had in mind to say about it. Let's see. We have the issue of damage and recovery. I had mentioned in a comment at Adept's Play about receiving damage. For example, the 4 points of damage that your character received from exposure. The way that's handled is you split it. Half goes to brawn, half goes to quickness. If it's an odd number, then the extra 1 goes to quickness. And so you were actually down 2 brawn and 2 quickness, not 4 brawn. So it, yes, hurt very much, but wasn't quite as, oh no, I'm like looking at the end from where I sit as it seemed in play at the moment. And another issue has to do with recovery. Even though you looked up the rule, it may not have processed while you were reading it quickly and talking. The way it works is that you take a look at how much brawn you have missing, which in this case you thought was 4, but was actually 2. So let's say 2. And that's how many days it takes to get 1 point of brawn back. Since it had only been 1 day, then you didn't get anything back. And would have had to have another day of recovery, then you would have received 1 point back. Then you do it again. You say, well, how many brawn am I down? And then you say, okay, that's how many days I have for the next point of brawn to come back. So anyway, that's how it works. And when I say point of brawn coming back, I actually mean 1 point of brawn and 1 point of quickness. So with the loss of 2 brawn and 2 quickness, it would have taken you 3 days to get all of it back. You're definitely spot on in terms of characterizing my view of the word drama, and you may have noticed that in videos and otherwise, I either avoid using the word because I think it's been so badly devalued in general speech, or I qualify it. I'll say something like small d drama. In the sense, which is very funny because that's kind of an inversion, isn't it, right? You would think that the classical definition and the somewhat more emotionally riveting version of the word drama would get the capital D, and that the slang version, the kind of superficial thespian or sort of even just synonym for complications and mess or whatever else one means by it in a slangy way, that would get the small d. But no, world doesn't work like that. And so when I say small d drama, strangely enough, people know exactly what I mean, that it is the one with the more experiential weight. Okay, well, so you were right on track with that. Now, I know you also said, well, I don't want to get into the whole indie versus traditional labeling. I completely agree with you about that. There are plenty of games which proudly sport an indie brand that I think are extraordinarily lacking in that feature. I'd be interested in your reading or assessment through experience, if any, of the White Wolf games, particularly those of the 90s, in terms of their rhetoric for drama and their use of that word in a very, well, to put it in an unfriendly way, a bombastic way. And their purport to be a different kind of role playing because they were emphasizing that very explicitly. And then any experience you had with play of those, and especially its possible relation to what you were characterizing as your thoughts on fun play. Well, if that applies to you, I'd be interested in one of these days. Well, this whole topic of choosing the character to play is wonderful. And I love the way that you continue to sort of focus on it. And I will celebrate a lot of things you did, specifically your looking at this extremely coherent, completely understandable character, the outdoorsman, the whole set of features that the character had just really, really gelled for me as you picked him up, spoke about him, started to play him, and this character was very much himself. The extent to which the different characters you play are you can let that take care of itself. It's a very functional, very powerful feature of the game, especially when it also seems clear to me that they were very different characters in that, dramatic way. And I personally thought it was great to experience. Now, that all has to do with picking up who it is and just seeing who they are and what you're going to do. There are a few things that I thought you might be interested in mechanically about that. One of them has to do with the traits. This actually ties into something that Ivan talked about in his reflection too that I didn't mention. It's pretty clearly stated, I think, in the rules that the traits are how your character starts. When someone says, well, you start with this in terms of the way you act. How do you lead? How does the character lead with their entry into a situation and their sense of how they would behave if they didn't reflect on it very much? That's what the trait is, much less so than sort of, well, okay, I got to be blunt again. Okay, I got to be shy again. My guy's shy. Okay, how do I do this shyly? Pretty much just we learn that the character is shy, and now we see what they do, shy or not shy, as the situation changes, as they become more invested in it in one way or another, or anything of the sort. So when you were saying, wow, that's funny, he's not being shy at the moment, what, is that bad? And the answer is no. We've seen him be shy, now we see why he's not. And I think that's an important freedom to recognize that you have, so that you don't actually second guess yourself in terms of what you want to do with the character. Oh, right. This is back to actually selecting the character from the circle. Character ownership is an immense standby of most role-playing, and it's really, really perhaps difficult to loosen certain knots of it. Character ownership is very powerful when you have it in Circle of Hands, but as you can see, that the knots are loosened, and it's really hard to see, well, isn't the whole cargo going to slide off if we loosen these knots, or if the knots give way or something, and hard to see what the new distribution of the load is supposed to be like, perhaps. Well, the rule is that once play embarks, after the first venture, you pick any circle knight you want, except for the one you just played. That's it. There's no other thing. The knight does not have to have been played first by anybody. It is not like you made that one up, and so therefore you're the one who can unlock them. Now everybody else can have their turns, now that you've unlocked them. That's not how it works at all. And your situation is a little wonky because of the GM shifting, but let's pretend that Anthony stayed the GM the whole time. The characters that Anthony made up would be accessible to you after the first venture, from that point on. It may be a little confusing because you made up two, and since you had to play one of yours in the first venture, the sort of the extrapolation that you would have to play your next guy in order for them to be available to others, just like the first one was, well, it's not the case. That's just a one venture, first venture constraint. Pick one of the ones you made. After that, the only constraint is don't play the one you just played. So anytime you play Circle of Hands, you have n minus 1 Circle Knights to choose from, and everybody in that quantity is equal in terms of you being permitted to grab them. I do think that the concept that the primary decisions of play are climactic in many cases, and what is remaining could easily be left to epilogue talk or something like that. There's a lot of strength to that. On the other hand, and putting aside all knowledge of time constraint, I'm just talking about the fiction as such. As an observer of the game, I was kind of disappointed that we didn't get to see the Silver Dragon kick some ass up on the keep. For one thing, it may have turned around your notion of the powerlessness of your situation. You were right. A Silver Dragon can fight groups. The Silver Dragon is perfectly capable of taking on either a horde of ghouls or a room full of people. Not necessarily that it would live through the onslaught of several different determined combatants, but it would definitely have a shot. Live or die really isn't the point, right? From the way your character was feeling at the time, through the agency of you as the player and how you were feeling at the time, that's not actually even the issue, is it? The issue is just going up there and blasting the fucking place to smithereens with half the people in it, because this is what you get. I don't know, maybe embracing a little bit of your inner Circle Knight is what I was gearing up to as an observer of play, and was like, oh, talk about your turnaround. I mean, you could fly up there, right? It wasn't as though you had to slog through the snow, like your companion did. You could fly up there, and the surrealistic presence of the Silver Dragon, which isn't just a great big horsey with scales, it's this bizarre psychedelic presence with your fellow Circle Knight in full battle mode, next to and even within the weird in and out of reality coils and stuff like that, operating as a team in a combat situation. Whew. There's some serious wall busting, the temptation to break that fucking window certainly comes to mind. The pure hardcore metal magic smackdown going on. Pretty tempting to imagine. I mean, yes, I can put that into my imagination as the denouement as well. But I'm thinking in terms of overcoming that sense of hopelessness or helplessness that your characters certainly felt in their way, and that mechanically actually had some, you had some counteractive force available to you, and your character was well on the route to delivering it. And I was kind of like, oh, just a little blowout, So anyway, I was with you on that as an observer. One of the things that people have said many, many, many times in role-playing is that it's not fun to watch, that it's boring to watch, that it's not a spectator thing. And yet again, I have it proved to me. I've seen it many times, and I've come to the conclusion that the only time that play is boring to watch is when it's boring play, and yours certainly was not.